Just wanted to let you know I'm back in my office. I've got my notes here, and we are going to kind of be talking about at-risk populations, poverty, things like that. So I'm going to have to look down at the notes a little bit because I can't memorize all these statistics. Too many, but I think you need to hear them. So there's 320 million Americans. Of them, 37 to 42 million Americans live in poverty. That means 1 in 7 of Americans, somewhere between 11 and 13% of Americans live in poverty. In Bucks County, we are a relatively wealthy county where we only have about 6.6% of our population that lives in poverty. Poverty has reduced considerably, quite frankly, since where it was back in like 1994, 2004. And a lot of that has to do with Obamacare and access to food stamps. Part of that is because people were spending so much money on health care and health insurance, and they were getting really sick and then having to pay extremely high bills to try to get well again. With Obamacare, that kind of reduced that. And also what people have found is that access to food can help people to make their rent payments and be able to buy a car. Because access to food through the different programs that are out there, through food stamps, through food banks, has helped people make ends meet in these difficult times. In the United States, even though I just said that we have 37 to 42 million people who live in poverty, we have 49 million people, even more, that are food insecure. And by food insecure, that means a state of being worried or concerned about where your next meal will come from, or consuming food that is of a very low nutritional value. Interesting that we are the wealthiest country in the world, and that we have the highest rate of poverty, of child poverty anyway, for every industrialized nation. Hillary Clinton one time said a quote that I think is really important. She said that between the age of 25 and 60, 40% of Americans will live in poverty for 1 year. I'm just going to repeat it. Between 25 years old and 60 years old, 25%, a whole quarter of Americans will live in poverty for 1 year. Right now, we are saying if you were to make the minimum wage that's prescribed of $15 an hour, that would give you $32,000 a year. If you look at the $7.50 minimum wage that it is in Pennsylvania right now and in many states, that would give you $15,600 a year. Can't make it in America. Can't make it in Bucks County or Pennsylvania. I think the average income for Bucks County right now is $70,000. So you can imagine if you're making $15,000 that's not going to work so well. Just thinking of two different continuums of life and how things can go. You could have two couples who get married. All right, one couple, the father has a decent job, he gets promoted. The mother's doing a little part-time real estate while she's finishing her master's degree in social work. The child is in a daycare 3 days a week, but it's co-op, so it's reduced funds, and mom comes once in a while to be a helper there. They go vacation once a year. They live in their own home. They have central air conditioning. This child starts their elementary school life in a warm, clean home, plenty of fruit and vegetables, joins sports teams, lives in the Council Rock School District. Another couple gets married the same day. Shortly after mom gets pregnant, the baby's born, and shortly after that, the father is laid off. His unemployment runs out before he can find another job. He'd only had a few college courses, so he doesn't really have any qualifications for a job except his basic laborer skills. Mom had a job, but she left it when she had the baby, so now she's doing some cleaning part-time. Family started to have trouble making rent, so they moved to a different one-bedroom apartment with the baby in a more run-down neighborhood. They have no COBRA ability with their insurance from when dad lost his job, so they have no insurance. They just have some for the baby under CHIP. No air conditioning. Try to keep the heat as low as they can. The parents are very stressed, and this is affecting the child because they can't focus enough to pay a lot of attention or give a lot of stimulation. There's no daycare, no preschool. And when this child goes to school ready to go at age 5, he's somewhat unprepared, has had a stressful time at home, somewhat hungry, and lives in a not as great of a school district as the other. So what does this suggest to you about economic justice for two people? Think for a moment what the implications are for a person who's 25 to 35 who is in that first situation of the parents doing well and all that financial support, and the second situation with the stress and the lack of stimulation. What's the difference? I'm probably going to ask you that as a question, so think about that for a moment. What is there a difference? Are they both on a level playing field when they're 5? And how does that playing field turn out when they're 25 and 30 years old? And I'm not saying people can't overcome things and do better, but what does it say? A childhood's education can be impacted by their health, by the competency of their parents, by the employment or unemployment or underemployment of their parents, of their access to different kinds of nutritional foods, transportation options, the quality of housing, the personal safety of family members, how they deal with things when someone is ill. There are a lot of things that can be affected by growing up in poverty. For a variety of reasons, there are more health problems. There is a higher level of mental illness. There is a shorter life expectancy. There are higher imprisonment rates. Test score levels are low. Drug use is higher. There's more obesity. There's higher homicide. In more equalized societies than Americans, you do find that people are more equal in all of those things. And that's kind of the reason that social policies and social welfare and social workers and government all interact, because we need to lobby for more equality of justice, of income, and I don't mean socialist income. I mean that people should all have a basic income, that they are able to get those basic services and provide for their families, at least from a nutritional and a medical viewpoint. I'm going to send you a list of all the states. If you were in class, I would love to read it out loud with you right now, but it kind of tells everything that the United States is best in, and some of those things are going to be surprisingly sad, and some of those things are going to be surprisingly almost embarrassing. I will ask you each a question about that too. So let's talk a little bit about how they have come up with what the poverty level is and how much you need to have to live in America. It started out, I guess, back in like 1955 when a home economist who worked for the government went out and did a full shopping load. So it was a basic load, but it was for a full week. And what was determined at that time was that a family should spend about 1/3 of their spending on food. So they came back and they tripled that, the amount that food was, and that's what they believed people needed to earn per week and per month. That has still not changed. We have not adjusted that or anything. It still is expected to be 1/3. The difference and why this is so much more complicated today is, yes, everything's gone up, the cost of everything, but there were no cell phones in the late 50s, which contributed to the cost of an income, or computers that you had to buy. Most people did not have air conditioning and had that on their electric bill. Most families really had one income workers, or they lived in a city, so most families were only paying for one car at a time. So start to add all of the things that cost more to live today, the more things that you need to have, and suddenly 1/3 of the food, taking your food and tripling that, is not enough to make ends meet. So for example, if I spend $120 a week on food, and I live alone, so that's possible, right? So that would be $460 a month on food. So if I tripled that, I would need to make about $1,400 a month. But my mortgage and things would already be $1,100. That would leave me $300 for all the other bills and everything else. So it no longer works. It needs to be adjusted. That's one of the reasons I'm bringing it up. Our poverty line doesn't make any sense. If it's $15,000 for a single person poverty line, no one can make it on that. So we need to fight for adjustments in that. The poverty line right now for a family of 4 is $32,000. which you still couldn't really do in Bucks County. For a family of 8, it's $54,000. And as I said, that was all based on the food and tripling that. Just giving me a second here. I want to say this is another thing I wanted to say besides Hillary. It's something to think about poverty. Congressman Jim Claiborne had always said that we should have a general calculation that if the federal government is going to give money to a county, a township, or any place, there should be a rule. It should be the 10, 20, 30 rule, and this is what that would be. It would say that the only communities that would get federal funding would be that 10% would go of the federal money would go to areas where 20% of the population lived below the poverty rate for 30 years. And I need to clarify that. He meant that when you give out the money, 10% of the federal money, not all federal money, but just 10% of the federal budget had to be given to places where 20% of the population lived below the poverty level for the last 30 years. That seems like a pretty fair thing. It definitely would that it could help to lift those people out. The minimum wage, just to chat about that for a minute. Minimum wage established in 1968. I was seven. It was $1.60 then, $1.60 an hour, and the idea was that the minimum wage would be able to lift you out of poverty, which we know, again, that doesn't work. Between 1997 and 2007, that $1.60 had gone up to $5.15. But even now, at $7.50 or $7.25, I forget which one it is, it does not hit the poverty level. For a family of 4, doesn't work. The Children's Defense Fund did a calculation, which I think you'll find is interesting. If you were to take the $5.15 minimum wage in 1990 compared to the rate of pay of a COO, Chief Operating Officer of a company in 1990, by 2005, 15 years later, minimum wage of $5 to keep congruent with that COO should have been $23 an hour. $23 an hour, which would mean for right about now, really to keep on track with what COOs are making, minimum wage in America right now ought to probably be about $35 an hour. So CEOs' rates went up in those 15 years 1,000%. Minimum wage in those 50 years didn't go up at all. So they also say that CEOs make more before lunch than minimum wage makes in an entire year. CEOs make more by lunch than minimum wage people make in an entire year. So things I wanted to talk about were kind of some myths of minimum wage, and I'm going to probably stick that in a reading for you. I'll stick it in the page so you can see what some of the myths are, and have you answer whether it's true or false, and then you'll see what that is. So I think that's an important thing. I don't want to be repetitive of things that were in class, that were in the readings that you're going to do. So I didn't want to talk too much about repetitive things. So let me talk about this for a minute. AFDC, Aid to Families with Dependent Children. AFDC. Just think about the sound of that for a minute. Aid to Families with Dependent Children. Then another program that we call TANF, which is TANF, Temporary Assistance to Needy Families. What would you rather have to receive money from if you had to? Would you rather receive money from a program called Temporary Assistance to Needy Families or assistance to families with dependent children? Most people say that aid to families with dependent children sounds better. Well, that's what it used to be for a long time. But in 1998, it was changed, and it was changed to Temporary Assistance to Needy Families, which was a little more pejorative, a little more negative, sort of a little more of stigma kind of attached to it. That was changed during Bill Clinton's presidency. I was a big supporter of his and everything, but the Personal Responsibility and Work Act PROA, P-R-W-O-A, is what changed AFDC to the temporary assistance idea. That was a reaction to people believing, as they often have, that welfare is full of cheats, that people are cheating the food stamp program, that people are cheating and getting free cash, that immigrants are out there getting money that they don't deserve. All lies, all not true. And this country often attributes things like that to laziness, that people aren't making it because they're lazy, so they're cheating. So they decided to go out there and try to find a plan to get around all that. And the main thing was that there would be no temporary assistance to needy families. A male doesn't qualify. A single person doesn't qualify. It has to be a female with children, and they can only get it for as much as they can get for 4 years total, like in life, 2 years for a child, then they have to be off of it again. And if they get pregnant during the 2 years they are on that program, if they're on TANF, they will not get an increase. So they still have to make it with the money that they get for one child if they have a child before 2 years. There can't be, I think there's no increase if you have more than 2 kids, so they're kind of limiting you to that. You have to identify who the father is. The father has to be found and determined to bring child support, so you have to identify who that person is. And the worst part of it all is that if you are approved for TANF, you'll get some money. But if you go to work, the cost of daycare will make you bring home less than TANF. So women are put in this tough situation. If I were to stay home and take the temporary assistance, I can be with my child, I can stimulate my child, read books to the child, do things with my child, bond with my child. If I go back to work, instead of accepting that assistance, I won't be able to nurture my child, and I'll spend half of my money having other people do that while the child goes to daycare. Daycare vouchers are very difficult to find. In Pennsylvania, they are called Apple Daycare. It takes a while to get on them. There is a long list. It's a great opportunity, but it's difficult for people to get up on there. Couple other things that I just want to make a comment about that. Is it you can answer this to yourself, is it a form of birth control to limit how much money you can get between children? So in other words, you can only get more money if you've waited at least 2 years to get another child. So are we effectively providing birth control in that way by telling women they can't get pregnant for another 2 years? Is that good or bad? What is the cost and the benefit of forcing somebody back to work early when they could really be home with their child, especially if they end up having a special needs child? Can be really difficult. Is it fair that people who are not poor and need TANF are forced back to work sooner than women who happen to have money? Is that a fair thing to the child? So that forced back to work thing, that was the other part of the Personal Responsibility and Work Act. Even though you could receive those funds for 2 years and another 2 years if you had another child, you, after, I believe it's 6 weeks in some states, but it has to be by 12 weeks by federal law, you have to either go back to work, go back to school, or do some kind of volunteer work. So that's why I've had a lot of students over the years who have gone back to school, and that part is good, to try to better themselves so that they can make more money, although it isn't always so easy to finish a degree in 2 years. There's also another thing with TANF, that there used to be drug testing with that. They finally stopped doing it because it was extremely expensive to test all these people all the time. But the reality is, studies have shown that most women who are accepting TANF funds are not using drugs. So taking that test was costing more than it was. They were getting very little from it. A lot of people will say that one of the bad parts of PROA is that it was sort of like a war on women and children. More often people called it the feminization of poverty, because there were more women and more children that ended up in poverty as a result of changing things to TANF. I think I'm going to stop right there for right now. I may get back on and just talk a little bit about public and private social service agencies. But for right now, I'll stick a couple of those questions and a statistical page about the United States compared to other countries. Thanks.